We've talked about faculty, students, the kids. A couple of statistics. According to Gallup, the proportion of Americans who claim no religious affiliation among Americans over 76 years old, just 7%. 93% of the oldsters claim a religious affiliation. The youngest group that Gallup tested is Americans between 26 and 41. Almost a third claim no religious affiliation, item one. Item two, I'm reasonably certain this is the same in Canada, at least in Eastern Canada, but certainly in the United States, poll after poll after poll shows that young people are far more open to socialism or to, at least to what we would say farther, not just left of center, but farther left political aims. They're the ones who most fervently support this. By the way, this is an inversion from the Reagan years in the 80s when the kids were more conservative than the older. That's not the case now. And then we add my personal observation, which is that during COVID, during the lockdowns, to me personally, almost more shocking than any other aspect was the supineness, the passivity of the kids. Except for, it was established very, very early that if you're young, you're at no serious risk of this. You'll get sick, perhaps. It'll be a flu. But you're more likely to die in a car accident up to the age of 20-something than you are to die of COVID. That got established right away. And universities shut down, and they made kids take exams on, or take their classes on Zoom, and I could detect no pushback. No kid was trying to diss the man. In general, they were saying, yes, master, like Igor's to Dr. Frankenstein. So this is all really bad news.
Why do you think the first part of that question is importantly related to the second part?
Well, I was sort of hoping that I was kind of setting that up as the question for you to answer.
Okay.
Yeah.
Fair enough.
In other words, I guess let's just state it, that this is extremely crude. And it feels even cruder now that I've listened to you talk with such sophistication for a while now. But here's the crude point, the crude suspicion is that if you don't have some notion of the transcendent, if you don't have some notion of the divine, then you'll believe any damn thing.
Yeah.
Right?
I think that's right.
And that's what the kids are doing.
Yeah, well, I mean, Dostoevsky's comment on that was, if there's no God, everything is permitted. You know, and he did a lovely job of analyzing that in Crime and Punishment and The Brothers Karamazov. And I think it's true. I think if you believe nothing, you'll fall for anything. And I really do believe that's the case. And, you know, you might say, well, what do you mean? You mentioned earlier that people like to ask me if I believe in God. And I always think, well, who are you to be asking that question? First of all, you have some notion of what you mean by believe that you think is just accurate because you know what believe means. And so you have an a priori theory about belief. And now you're asking me if my belief in God fits into your a priori theory. It's how about we start by questioning your a priori theory of belief? Because I don't even know what you mean by believe, and neither do you. Especially when we're asking a question that profound. Because, do you believe in God? There's two mysteries there. Well, three. You believe God. All three of those are subject to question. I think people act out what they believe. And so when people ask me if I believe in God, I say generally that I act as if God exists, or I try to act as if God exists. And they're not very happy about that because they want me to abide by the implicit rules of their question, which is no, do you believe in the religious view as a pseudoscientific description of the structure of reality? It's like, well, I don't even know how to answer that question because it's so badly formulated I can't get a handle on it. Do you believe that there's something divine? Well, let's try to define divine. Here, we can do that for a moment. Most of us have some sense that literary stories differ in their depth. I don't think that's an unwarranted proposition. Some stories are shallow and some stories are deep. Some stories are ephemeral and some move you deeply. Whatever that means, it's a metaphor, but we understand what it means. Imagine there are layers of literary depth. And one way of conceptualizing the layers of literary depth is that the deeper an idea is, the more other ideas depend on it. Right? And so you have fundamental ideas that are fundamental because if you shake that idea, you shake all the ideas that are dependent on them. And then I would say, well, the realm of the divine is the realm of the most fundamental ideas. And you don't get to believe in that or not, because the alternative is to say, well, all ideas are equal in value. It's like, okay, well, try acting then. And you can't, because you can't act unless you prioritize your beliefs. And if you prioritize them, you arrange them into a hierarchy. And if you arrange them into a hierarchy, you accept the notion of depth. And so that's a no-go. When we use language of the divine, we're talking about the deepest ideas. And so I believe that the notion that each individual is characterized by a consciousness that transforms the horizon of the future into the present, that's a divine idea. It's so deep. And our cultures necessarily, I think functional cultures are necessarily predicated on that idea. So I don't just think it's a Western idea. I don't think you can have a functional culture that in some sense doesn't instantiate that idea, because you interfere with the mechanism of adaptation itself by not allowing it free expression. You know, and you can be like my prime minister and you can say, well, I really admire the Chinese Communist Party because when it comes to environmental issues, they get things done. And I think, I couldn't begin to tell you how many things are wrong with that statement. It would take like 15 years to tell you why you're an inexcusably narcissistic idiot. But we can start like simply. If you know what you're doing and you have power, if you know what you're doing, maybe you can be more efficient in your exercise of, in your control over movement towards that goal. Let's just assume for a minute that you do know what you're doing. Well, maybe if you have power, then you're efficient. Fair enough, man. What about when you don't know what you're doing? How about then? Where do you turn? Because what that means is your ideology failed you. And do you have a mechanism for operating when you don't know what you're doing? Well, no, because we always know what we're doing because we're totalitarian and we have a complete theory of everything. And don't say anything to the contrary or else. We've got it all wrapped up. Yeah, except when you don't. And so what do we do in free societies when we don't know what we're doing? Well, we let people talk. And out of that babble, out of that noise, and American culture is particularly remarkable in this regard, you have this immense diversity of opinions, most of which are completely useless, and some of which are absolutely redemptive. And one of the things that's so remarkable as a Canadian observing your culture in particular is that, you know, you guys veer off in weird directions fairly frequently and things look pretty unstable, and then there's some glimmer of hope somewhere that bursts forward in a whole new mode of adaptation, and away you go again. And that just happens over and over and over. And that's a consequence of real diversity. And it's definitely a consequence of like freedom of association and freedom of speech, because it enables all that.
George, so